who they are, but also how they engage with culture and creativity in their lives and in our community. John, do you want to start?
Happy to. Thank you. It's great to be with you all. Who am I? I'm not a typical politician. Indeed, some people would say I'm not a typical conservative. My background's in science, in education, and international development. I could expand on all of those, but I think we want to keep the intros brief. So in terms of how I engage with culture, etc., my wife and I were discussing this on the way in, and one of the highlights of being in Cambridge for us is the annual Cambridge Shakespeare Festival, but we're also big fans of Fitzwilliam Museum, so we've got a couple of teenage children and like to partake of the many great museums around the city, but Fitzwilliam's our favourite.
Okay, indeed, a wealth of museums in Cambridge. Thank you very much. Julian.
I'm Julian Huppard. I was the Member of Parliament here for 5 years, having grown up here in Cambridge, went to school here, lived here, worked here. But I want to start actually with an apology. I normally have a policy of not going on all-male panels. And unfortunately, unless one of us decides to make some quite radical changes, we may be having quite a few of those. We don't have a UKIP candidate. It's possible they'll save the gender balance, but I'm not certain of that.
We have a question about diversity and difference.
Oh, right, okay, well I'm glad we have such a diverse panel to start with. In terms of arts and culture, I mean, I'm interested in all sorts of things. I mean, that's probably what I was just saying. The last thing I was in here to see was The Vanishing Man, so I don't know which of us will volunteer for that role. But I did more music when I was younger. I was I'm still slightly bitter. I was told by an art teacher that I was rubbish at art when I was little, and that took me a while to realise that actually you can be creative even without necessarily having brilliant skills. But I did a lot of music, mostly percussion, performed in various places doing all sorts of wonderful and silly things, sort of Dadaist piece in Kettle's Yard, all sorts of weird and wonderful things like that. And I have a taste which vary from good classical stuff to very weird things. I'm a regular folk festival attendee and very much an enjoyer of that.
Thank you. And Stuart.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Stuart Tuppard. I'm the Green Party candidate to be MP for Cambridge. I am an NHS charge nurse. I work at Addenbrooke's. I've been here in Cambridge for the last 3 years, living and working. Unfortunately, my long shifts at the hospital mean that, as I cracked this joke earlier, but the only culture I get to see a lot of times is what's grown in a test tube. But I do enjoy getting out and about as much as I can. I like going out and seeing live music. I think the most recent gig I saw was the specials of the Corn Exchange, but I do enjoy getting down and see things at the Portland Arms as often as I can as well. Personally, unfortunately I'm not very musical. I'm terrible at picking up and trying to play an instrument. I have dabbled with the ukulele a little bit, but I do enjoy creative writing, poetry, that kind of things as well, but don't worry, I'm not going to break any out tonight.
Thank you. And finally, Daniel.
Daniel Zeichner, the Labour Party candidate for the election, and had the huge privilege of being the MP for Cambridge for the last 2 years. And can I say right at the outset to anyone who supported me last time, thank you so much. It is a fantastic job, and despite difficult times, I've enjoyed every minute of it, and I thought it was going to be for 5 years, so I'm just hoping a little bit more. In terms of art and creativity, one thing I love about Cambridge is the live music scene. I enjoy Milrow Winter Fair so much. It's always the bands I end up watching. I came along for the Battle of the Bands the other night here, and find myself really enjoying Jason and Scargonauts and thinking, why don't I come for the whole evening to the last bit? And through the last few years, I've regularly made space to go to Kettle's Yard Chamber concerts on Thursday evening with my partner. I think many people were sometimes surprised to see me there. I just feel it's important to keep that link. As a youngster, I was not a very good violinist. At the time when I stopped doing it, my music teacher said, "You'll forever regret it," and he was right. But you wouldn't want to hear it now.
Brilliant, thank you. So, welcome to our candidates. We've ordered them tonight in case anybody's worried about impartiality in order of surname alphabetically, and they're colour-coded above. If anybody is in doubt about who's from which party, just look up. We held a similar debate to this about 2 years ago, well, 2 years ago almost exactly, and actually it was really enjoyable, and it's as simple as we enjoyed it last time, so we're doing it again. We were last time, and actually we are this time, one of the first election debates. It means that the party manifestos aren't out yet, So the candidates can't talk about their manifestos, but might be able to talk about their personal ambitions for those manifestos. But it also means we can have a relaxed and friendly atmosphere rather than really having to score points or to make certain points about things that are important. The structure that we're going to have is that I'm going to ask questions for about 45 minutes and then open up to the floor for 45 minutes. So if you have a question in mind, just keep it in your mind and we will come to you in a bit. And we'll finish off with drinks in the foyer, which everybody's welcome to. And we'll buy the candidates a drink and hopefully they'll stick around and talk to us and in a more informal way in the foyer. And that's always fun because you can really get up close and personal. I enjoy that. I think the candidates do as well.
Should never have to buy a Scotsman a drink. I'll be here all night.
Well, you're welcome. I'm sure the public would enjoy it. The focus of tonight's discussion is Cambridge, the arts, culture and the creative and cultural industries. So just to define the creative and cultural industries, which the government's creative industries mapping document in 2001 defined it as those industries which have their origin in individual creativity, skill and talent, which have potential for wealth and job creation through the generation and exploitation of intellectual property. So we're talking about, in many senses, through that definition, individual and independent talent, which has the opportunity for commercialisation or exploitation. The Creative Industries Federation goes on to note that unlike many other sectors, and despite some major household names, the creative industries are not comprised of big companies. The creative businesses have on average 3.3 workers, and a large number of freelancers who are important to the creative workforce. So this is important in understanding how the sector works and what it might need. Economically, the Creative Industries Federation, who's recently put out a manifesto for this election, have talked economically about the creative industries, as the UK's creative industries are key to driving growth in the post-Brexit Britain. The sector is the fastest growing part of the UK's economy, contributing 87 billion in gross value added, or GVA. It returns 4 times the GVA of the automotive industry, 6 times that of the life sciences, and nearly 10 times that of aerospace. Between 2011 and 2015, it created 3 times more jobs in the British economy than the economy as a whole. And the UK is the 3rd largest exporter of cultural goods and services in the world, behind China and the USA. So we have individuals, a sense of business, economic importance and significance. We of course also have the social benefit of the arts. Arts Council England's mission is great art and culture for everyone. And I think anybody working in the arts really understands and believes in providing cultural activity for all. And of course we're in Cambridge, so why is this debate particularly important in Cambridge? Well, clearly we have strong creative and cultural industries in Cambridge, and we also have a strong network of arts infrastructure and are home to a number of Arts Council England national clients who are known as national portfolio organisations. So this is just a bit of the environment that we're going to talk about today. I'd like to thank, just really briefly, some partners who help us distribute the word about this event. And I think it's one of the nice things about Cambridge is that it's very well networked and that you can get words out there. So I'd like to thank the Cambridge Arts and Cultural Leader Organisations, the CAM Creatives, Cambridge Wireless and Collusion as some of the people who've got the words out. Also, in terms of local media, we have Cambridge 105 here today who are doing a show on this, but we also have live blogging, I hope, from Josh Thomas. Is he in the audience? We've got live blogging from Josh Thomas from Cambridge News. Okay, Cambridge politics. We know that Cambridge is a tight seat. I suspect everybody knows that from last time. 599 votes was the difference between the successful Labour candidate and the Lib Dems in the last election. So we know it's tight in the seat. But we also know that we have a Labour-controlled city council. We also know that recently the Conservatives were elected as the mayor for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. But we also know that we have a strong Remain vote in the city. 74% of the city voted for Remain. So this, I think, is providing an interesting mix as we enter the election and some of the context. So that's it from me. So now I'm going to start asking questions to the candidates. Julian, how and why do you think creativity and creative creative activities, creativity and creative activities matter to society. What is it that's important?
I think there's a huge amount. So when I was thinking when you were talking earlier on about the financial benefits, that, yeah, you know, that's all true, but that's actually sort of not the point. I think there is a much wider purpose to society and purpose to existence than measures like GDP and GVA. And to me, one of the most important things is about how people feel about their own lives. This is something, those of you who are here 2 years ago know I said the same things 2 years ago. I've tried to be consistent. What is it that actually matters to people in life? And when you turn it all into just money, you miss a huge amount of what actually makes people happy. If you don't have much money, money is crucially important. It makes a big difference to have somewhere to live, be able to get food, all those things. Which is why we did things like lifting poorly paid people up out of income tax, you know, living wage, all that sort of thing. Really, really important. But above a certain point, there's lots of studies which show that the things that make a difference to how people report their lives isn't about having more money. I mean, yes, everybody would like more money than less money, but it's about other factors. It's about whether you like where you live, whether you have friends, whether you have hobbies, and whether you get engaged with arts and cultural activities. That's the point. It is so much more the point of life than just the GDP things.
Yep.
And we're going to see society continue to change. I was working in my day job until recently on the future of work. As we have more automation, what's going to happen? Probably there will be less labour. So what will people do with their lives? And actually, if the answer isn't arts and culture and broader things like that, what is it? There's only a certain amount of daytime TV you can actually watch. Sorry, I'm being very unfair. That's also arts and culture, but you know, some of it. So to me, it's absolutely important. So because I start off with the idea that the purpose of what society should be doing is to empower people to achieve things that they want to do with their lives, and the way to measure that is how happy people are about their lives, this is absolutely crucial, well above and beyond any sort of financial figures. So the Creative Industries Federation, given the tenure at the moment, a right to talk about the pure economic gain, but that really is just an argument for the fact that this is fundamental to what it means to be a human.
Quality of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Stuart, do you want to add or?
Yeah, I'd like to add some things. I very much agree with Julian that life's not just about financial gain and about the things that you can measure in terms of economics. When I was preparing for this, I was looking back at some famous political speeches, and one that was given by Jimmy Reid, the famous Glasgow trade unionist at the university I attended, where he said something quite significant. He said, "The rat race is for rats. We are not rats, we're human beings." I think the spirit of what you were saying was that our lives should be about so much more than just what can be measured by your income and just by your wealth as well. And so, for me, culture is about all the things you've talked about. It's about creative industries, about innovative, kind of new dynamic culture, those kind of things, what that adds to people. But it's also about culture that comes from the bottom up as well, also about the culture that we produce in our communities and in our lives. And one of the things I really wanted to talk about tonight was how great all the things that go on in Cambridge are, but how we also need the space for people in their communities to come together, to form groups, to have organisations that allow them to give definition to their lives and to take part in things that add all that value that Julian talked about, that isn't just things to do with their financial income as well.
Daniel.
I'd agree with much has already been said, but I suppose I'd add a slightly different dimension, which is who gets access to this. Because I think there's plenty of evidence to show that people from poorer parts of the country, poorer parts of our city, don't have the same access. And as a Labour politician, that really bothers me, because I think it actually makes a huge difference, exactly as has already been said, to the quality of people's lives. But actually, as the Federation show, it actually lifts people's attainment and achievement as well. So there's a virtuous circle here, and I wouldn't underestimate the economic points, because as you know, Daniel, running a centre like this can't be done on goodwill. Money does matter too. And I do think the squeeze that's being put on, and I think the squeeze in the educational curriculum around things like the EBAC, means that we've been going in the wrong direction on these issues. So I think there's quite a big debate to be had. And the final point I'd make is, I think the change we saw when our national museums and galleries were made free for people to access, I know quite hard for some people in the sector sometimes, but the change that made for so many people that they could actually have access, I think has been quite transformative. And it's really important we keep that.
Okay, great. And John, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, as someone with a career in international development, of course I'm going to agree with the points about human flourishing. However, I'm going to disagree with the 87 billion not being relevant. That 87 billion isn't just a number, a financial figure on the back of someone's envelope. that figure represents almost 6% of all jobs. So that's more than 1 in 20 people. I suspect the proportion in this room, because of the nature of this debate, is even higher than that. But certainly in countrywide, that's 1 in 20, more than 1 in 20, whose jobs depend on this sector. And not just depend on it, are contributing to the well-being, the human flourishing of all the rest of us who are able to partake of that. And the government believes in that. Theresa May and the Conservatives believe in that. And that's why we've committed, over the last 12 months, for instance, we've had 2,500 people who have benefited from the Film Skills Fund bursaries. People who are able to develop skills in the creative industries. That's why since 2013 there have been millions piled into some of the Skills Initiative Fund, working with industry through a match-funded scheme, which means film, video, TV industries have been able to train up the next generation of people who are going to be exporting our films, etc., in the post-Brexit economy.
I think this is a good start, because what we have is an agreement, I think, around culture is important for quality of life. Economic benefits are clearly part of that, but also about creating identity and equality in the community. So this is a really good starting point for our discussions. I'm going to move this second question to what is probably the elephant in the room, or is not so much an elephant, but Brexit is on everybody's mind, and people will be wondering how Brexit will impact their lives. And it would be nice to focus on Brexit and the creative and cultural industries. What do you think that we can do to get the best for Cambridge? Stuart, do you want to start on that one?
Certainly. There's obviously a lot of unknowns with Brexit still. A lot is going to depend on the negotiations that happen over the next couple of years, and also to do with what our government prioritises in those negotiations. I think it's very, very important that we stand up for free movement of people within the European Union. That's obviously a hugely popular thing in Cambridge. I'm sure many people here in the room have benefited from living, studying, and working in Europe, and many people here will have benefited from people coming from Europe to do all those things here with us as well. How it specifically relates to creative industries will be up for negotiation. Obviously, it will be more difficult for the industries to operate if there's restrictive immigration controls. It's more difficult for people to travel here. But I think looking at it very, very narrowly doesn't do the whole issue justice. It's going to be something I'm going to say repeatedly over the next month. I believe freedom of movement is a really good thing, not just economically, but for us culturally and societally as well. And I want to protect that. It's going to be very important that the government sticks up for that over the next couple of years, because, as I say, it's unknown exactly what's going to happen and how it will affect these industries. But if government does prioritise protecting that free movement of people, then I'm certain that it will benefit the creative industries and our society in the longer run.
Okay.
I think that I am a long way from accepting that we are going to be leaving the European Union. I voted against the triggering of Article 50 on every single occasion, and I will continue to do so. Now, I fully accept that at the moment it looks as if we're on that path, but I think Article 50 is reversible. I think that as the true costs become apparent, many people will begin to ask themselves, is this really what we want to do? And I think we should be fighting. I totally agree on the freedom of movement point. It's particularly crucial for Cambridge. And let me give you one particular example around the creative industries. We haven't talked so far about the video gaming industry, which I think is actually a fascinating example of where tech and creativity meets. And there's some very good examples in the city, and of course there are some good projects that you're involved in. But what I hear from the video gaming industry is that if we lose the freedom of movement, then we will really, really be a threat, because we rely on people moving around, coming and going, and a further element is the free movement of data, in fact, not perhaps something which people have really heard about or talked about much, but I've done a lot of work on this in Parliament, a real problem. We could end up in a situation a bit like the planes won't be able to fly, the data won't be able to flow, and that will kill that industry. So there are some really big threats here, and I don't think yet, and certainly the government seems to have no answer on some of these big questions. When you look at their white paper, it is vacuous, frankly, just as is the Prime Minister's statements on this so far. She's getting away with it at the moment, but we've got to have a much more sophisticated response. When you look at some of the things some of the European politicians are saying, people from the European Parliament, for instance, going into the detail of what needs to be done, this idea that it can be done in 2 years is for the birds, quite frankly. We've got to keep on fighting it, and my view is never give up.
I have to say, I like Daniel a lot. We always exchange pleasantries when we meet each other around the Parliamentary Palace. But I'm very disappointed to hear that response. Article 50 has been triggered. The government said before the vote, which we all wrapped our consciences over, that whatever we voted on, the government would implement. They are enacted, invoked Article 50. We are leaving the EU. The question now is not fighting old battles. The question is, how do we get the best deal for Cambridge, for the country, and for Europe? I'm pro-European. I help train European politicians, and I know they struggled with the same issue, particularly some of the ones from Eastern Europe that I work with, really struggled as to what they wanted us as a country to do last June in terms of what would be in the best interests of their country. But as I say, I don't think this is about looking back on old battles and fighting. We've got 27 people on the continent. We've seen in the past week some of the fights we really need to be having. Some of the hard Brexiters on the European continent who would put a stop to the freedom of movement on which our creative industries do depend. Our export industries do depend. And the bottom line in this election is who is going to be able to, which party is going to be able to deliver the strong economy, the stable leadership, crucially, the 74% of us here in Cambridge who are Remainers. How is our voice going to be heard in a government that's saying, oh, we're just going to go along and try and get the best deal? How is our 74% voice going to be heard? Is it by having an ex-MP shouting from the opposition benches, or is it by having a strong voice for Cambridge who's got the contacts and the influence and the ear of government and has worked with government ministers and has worked alongside the Prime Minister's Policy Board, is able to work as part of Theresa May's strong and stable government? That strong voice for Cambridge happens to be me.
I suspect Julian might have an alternative.
Yes, slightly. There was a lot I disagreed with there, but I love getting the soda in, and I'm sure that will get you brownie points. I mean, the one thing I did agree with was that we do want what's best for Cambridge, what's best for the UK, and what's best for the EU. It's just that I don't think we have to give up on what we believe in order to achieve that. I am still passionately pro-European. I'm proud to live in Europe. I'm proud to be a European citizen. I want all of that to continue. There is no reason why we have to give it up. Article 50 is reversible. It's very, very clear that we can stop this. Now, I accept that at the moment it's quite hard to see with Labour and the Conservatives both pushing it through. It is going to be hard, but we should not give up. And I will not give up on our role inside the European Union until the day we actually leave. The day after that, I will probably take a day off to cry or something like that. And the next day, I will campaign for us to get back in the European Union, because the future for this country has to be working with other people. Shutting ourselves off, isolating ourselves, cannot be the right thing to a world which is becoming ever more international. I realise you think we are best just giving up and trying to get what we can. I will keep pushing. I also think that you can make a case for Cambridge, even if you can't win that case. And so I would argue, and I think what Stuart was saying about freedom of movement in particular is really important. Really, really important. It's not just about people coming here to work, though that's important. It's not just about people here going there to experience culture. Different cultures will feed in. But it's also a lot of artistic organisations travel. We've already seen orchestras and other groups unable to go from Germany to France to the UK because of some visa problem, because some cellist happens to be a Russian, or whatever it might be. It is already expensive, already reducing what we can do. Just think how much worse it will be if every time a group from here wants to go and perform in Paris, everybody has to apply for some sort of visa. It'll be an utter nightmare. There are also financial reasons. We currently benefit from quite a lot of the arts funding there is via the EU. We get more out than we put in. Will that be replaced? We have no idea. So I will keep fighting. We should never have had this referendum in the first place. I would never have voted for it. I did everything I could to stop it. It was divisive and damaging, but I'm not going to give up on it now.
Can I come back on this just very quickly, Daniel, as well?
Sure.
I have this very strong feeling that I'm going to be hearing this quite a lot. So I'd like to say straight away that strong and stable leadership isn't very good for anyone if that strong and stable leadership is leading you over a cliff. And the problem with what you're going to argue over the next month, as I imagine, is that Theresa May has asked for this election. She's asked for the people's opinion, and if the people here in this room and the people in Cambridge want to stay in the European Union, then they're fully entitled to send representatives to Parliament to fight to stay in the European Union. If that's what people want, and that's what people can vote for on June the 8th.
So let's think about the future. Brexit, part of it, but also Cambridge is an extraordinary place to live because of the dynamism within a city that's growing and shifting and changing. Obviously, we know the population is increasing, businesses are coming in, the city physically is getting bigger, everything's getting bigger. What role can the arts and the creative industries have in this growth? Daniel, do you want to start us on this one?
I think really important, because one of the things I've been saying in the 2 years I've been in Parliament is, firstly, never assume that future success is taken for granted. And we've got to make sure that Cambridge goes on being a place that people want to come to. Now, at the moment, people seem to assume that that's a given. But if there's nothing, if the things that people want in life, as we were talking about earlier, aren't here, that will cease to be part of the attraction. I look at some of the new housing developments, and frankly, there isn't enough for people. You look especially parts of the city, it's not great. So I think it's actually really important. At the moment, sometimes I hear businesses saying to me, we've had investors come to look, the chief executives spent 45 minutes getting from London to Cambridge, and then an hour trying to get from Cambridge Station to anywhere else in Cambridge. And they're saying, whoa, we don't want to come here if it's like this. So we've got to get the transport and the housing system sorted out. People also find, if they can't get their kids into the schools, that's a problem. But the extra bit is actually the quality of life once you're here. So I think the creative sector for Cambridge is part of that big offer that's going to keep us being one of the key global cities. Because if Brexit happens, then I think we're going to be at a serious disadvantage. And we're already hearing of people who are choosing not to come here, people, very talented people who are leaving. So this offer's got to be better and better. And I think we're a part of that. You're a part of it.
Yeah. And John, growth in Cambridge, what is the role of the creative and cultural industries in the arts?
I'm going to pick up on a point that Daniel made, because he is right. The infrastructure is inhibiting the potential that creative industry is already contributing but could do more. And let's be honest, for 25 years we've had Labour and Lib Dem administrations in this city, and for the 25 plus years I've been around in Cambridge, it seems to get worse and worse every year. And I know umpteen people who just say they don't even bother coming into Cambridge anymore because it's so bad. And we've got to reverse that trend, and I'm extremely thankful we therefore do have a Conservative representative for this city at last in the new mayor of Cambridgeshire. In terms of coming back to the actual question that was asked, the role of creative industries here, it is key. As part of my work in Westminster, one of the parliamentary groups I've been able to attend is the technology group. And for the technology group, one of the big things of the future is the Internet of Things and smart cities. And there are a number of elements to that. Cambridge does really well in terms of learning and knowledge. Everyone knows Cambridge for all that it contributes in those fields. But creative is one of the other elements where we do have a lot going on, but our reputation doesn't necessarily extend in a global way that our reputation for learning and knowledge does. And there's no reason that shouldn't be the case. So I would love to see more done in terms of particularly encouraging the next generation. And again, because we do have a Conservative government at the moment, we have been able to demonstrate our commitment to the creative industries. One of the things I love, for instance, because I've got two teenage children, is the way we've been able to work with the British film industry to set up over 10,000 active film clubs in schools, which is just helping to nurture the next generation.
How many of those are in Cambridge, do you know?
I don't know how many of those are in Cambridge. We do have a lot of excellent schools in Cambridge, though, so I would imagine a good handful,
Cool.
but only a proportionate.
Okay, cool. Julian, do you want to take us looking at the future, creative cultural industries, or you might want to bounce off the smart city comment about how we might use data to enhance the nature of our city.
There's a lot of things. I mean, I just can't quite resist the point. John said we've had Lib Dem and then Labour councils here, but actually Transport is the county council, and that's been Tory run for 20 years. Schools are the county council, that's been Tory run for 20 years. So I realise it's now a couple of weeks late to say that we could have had a change, but but if you think that hasn't been done well, it is the Tory County Council that has been responsible for that for 20 years. Some of us have worked to try to get things in. The new Cambridge North Station, which I fought for ages for, is going to happen, and hopefully that will mean that when the CEOs come in, they won't have as far to travel. But we desperately need that sort of infrastructure, because otherwise Cambridge, it's not really that people won't want to come here, it's they can't afford to get here, and they can't get around once they get here. And that's what could kill Cambridge off. But let me talk more positively about the actual question, controversially. And you asked me to talk about smart cities, so I'll say a bit about that as well. Community matters. Stuart was right when he talked about that. What is it that makes people want to do things? People work some of the time, but most people don't work all of the time. What is it that binds communities together? And there are some areas of Cambridge where we do have facilities, and it almost doesn't matter what that facility is that brings people together. It can be a good pub, it can be an arts thing, all sorts of things. There are areas around Cambridge, some of the surrounding areas, new builds, where there's almost nothing, where there is just a sparsity. If you look in areas like King's Hedges and Arbury, there's very, very little. That's not right. That's not fair for the people who are there. We need to have more. Should we look at better community facilities, arts facilities? We were talking about this a bit earlier, small enough things so they can be sustained. I take the point about the costs. Arts and cultural activities have a huge role in bringing communities together, providing somewhere for people to meet each other, to do things. Amateur dramatics have a sort of bit of a joke name, but actually if it just means that everybody knows who they all are, that is hugely positive. On smart cities, I think there is some really interesting stuff. Some of you will know I'm a big technophile and a bit geeky on some of these things. Was doing a lot of work actually on Internet of Things and how we can use that to change a city. Using data well to try to work out what's actually going on in a city can be incredibly beneficial. Make the area much more interesting, help people to get around, help people enjoy their space, but also to interact. And there is real scope for doing some very, very creative things, some very artistic things, by using the data, by using the observations that there are. And I hope that Cambridge can really lead the way in terms of doing all of that. There are a few places that are probably ahead of us. There's I forget the name of the city in South Korea that's really pushed ahead with this. I was reading about it, I forgot the name anyway. But Cambridge should be able to lead with that. But I think the point also that, I can't remember who made it now, might have been you, a lot of people don't know about what's going on here in Cambridge. Cambridge actually can be deeply arrogant in some ways, but also has a habit of not letting people know about what we're doing in other ways. On the technology side, ARM, massive company. Most people had no idea about how big it was. Last year there were more ARM chips shipped than there are human arms in the world. It's amazing. Most people didn't know that. To the extent that Philip Hammond said that it being sold to the Japanese meant that to achieve its global potential, it could achieve global potential. It's 97% of the mobile market. How much more global does it need to be? But the same is true about the creative things. We're not actually very good about letting other people know what we have.
Stuart, do you want on the final response to this question?
Sure. Cambridge is obviously a place that's growing. It's going to continue to grow in years to come. And I think Daniel and Julian have talked about how important it is that it remains a good place for people to live. I think that cultural, creative industries can play a really important role in that, helping people imagine the kind of place, the kind of city that they want to live in years to come. The danger is that with rapid growth, with housing developments going up everywhere, is that it rapidly becomes a place people don't actually want to live in. Recently, the Cambridge Green Party did some work around imagining what a city could look like in 2030, 2040, at the time when we have to have low emissions, when we have to be zero carbon as a city if we're going to meet our international targets on climate change. And it was a really powerful thing to do, and a number of other local environmental organisations are doing similar things, and I think there's a role for creative organisations to play in that kind of process as well. And what we really don't want is Cambridge to rapidly become a city like London, for example, where rapidly people in creative industries, people in music, art, performance, can't afford to live in the city. And many of the trendiest, coolest parts of London are now places that are dominated by foreign investment in property, where people can't actually afford to buy houses and live locally. And it's also going to be very important that we retain the sense of community in all the different areas of Cambridge as we grow. John's painted a very rosy picture so far of what the Conservative government's done in terms of funding, but the reality is that We've lost something like 8,000 paid staff in libraries around the country over the last 6 years. 350 libraries have closed. The central library in the city here had to look at privatising one of its floors just to find revenue to keep itself going. We need to make sure that these places like the communities in Cambridge keep those things in the community, like libraries and like the creative industries, that make it a good place to live for people as well. But crucially, people also need to be able to afford to live here, so we need to deal with the cost of living as well.
Absolutely. I know Simon, who is up there operating the lights tonight, wanted to let you all know that he has trouble, and in fact many of our staff have trouble in Cambridge in affording to live here. We're working in the arts where salaries are relatively low, and the majority of our staff don't live in Cambridge. I'm not able to vote for this election for you because I live in a village outside of Cambridge because it's cheaper, and that's the case for a lot of our staff. So this issue of affordability in Cambridge is a super big one, definitely for our sector, because we're not able to live close to work, which is something which is truly frustrating. Can we talk more a little bit about inequality? One of the things that the creative and cultural industries has a particularly patchy track record on is supporting diversity and difference within the workplace. For instance, we know that from the DCMS's Creative Industries Focus on Employment report, which is 2015, that BAME workers, culturally diverse workers, made up 11% of the UK workforce, but only 6% of the workforce for music, performing and visual arts, which is my sector. But we also know that women make up only a third of the workforce in the IT software and computer services. So we have some clearly significant challenges in terms of equality and diversity and difference within our sector. What can you and your party do to address this issue of diversity and equality in the creative and cultural industries? John, can you talk us through what you and the Conservatives are doing?
So again, I can look at our track record. So I mentioned earlier, I think over 1,800 people young people have benefited from some of the funding projects that we've done, and those were specifically targeted at underrepresented groups, so some of the equality issues you mentioned, as well as regional initiatives, so looking at some of the underrepresented regions. So that's something that we've shown, we're committed to, and that's something that we want to do more of. I think it's great, probably most of us have heard, I think it was news today, Emma Thompson receiving the first gender-neutral Best Actor award. I think that is progress. That's obviously something that's not government initiated, that's coming from the industry. And there's got to be both. It's not going to be solved simply by government intervening. It has to come from within the industry as well. I think there's really good signs of what is going on in both those areas.
Okay. Julia, do you agree there's good signs of what's going on?
I haven't seen the figures for a long time. We're seeing, in general, more equality across society, but I'm not sure I would put that down to recent government intervention. And there's clearly lots of problems. I think there's problems, as you've highlighted, around gender balance, the ethnicity balance. I think there's also, and it's not true in all areas, I haven't seen the data in all areas, but family wealth still predisposes in some areas of the arts and cultural communities, and that's a big problem. Some of that is particularly things, I think acting was one of the ones that was highlighted by a report a couple of years ago, and I assume it's still the same now, where because so much of the training is done in central London, and because it is so expensive now to be in central London, in order to be able to do the courses, to start off as an early stage actor earning almost nothing, you either have to have very wealthy parents who will just support you through it, or they have to live in central London themselves, in which case you can just stay there. That means there's a huge chunk of people who are excluded. Now, part of that is about having more training elsewhere, but part of it is also about making sure there are those facilities where people can get by, because otherwise it becomes an incredibly risky thing. And taking a career, you said earlier that arts are, and cultural activities are generally poorly paid, unfortunately that is largely true, it makes it a very risky thing to do. So family wealth is a big factor there. I don't know all of the causes. I think some of it is role models, that there is the idea that we do separate, a good actor versus a good actress. We're making some progress, but why has it taken this long? You look at ethnicity in actors, you look at the pay differential. Male stars in films are paid significantly more than female stars in films in most cases. We know across society there's a big gender pay gap, a big ethnicity pay gap. which we absolutely have to try to close down and get rid of.
Stuart, how do you think the Greens could address inequality, especially in the creative and cultural industries?
So obviously there is the issue of inequality between ethnicity, genders as well, but one that I think you didn't mention specifically at the start is the difference in wealth inequality, how that affects people progressing into these kind of industries. I think everyone will recognise that it's becoming increasingly difficult for people to find secure employment in things like the creative industries and indeed in many different areas of the economy. One of the things that is particularly frustrating for us is the rise of internships, people being asked essentially to do work unpaid for long periods of time to try and get themselves the experience that they need to get ahead and get a job in the creative industries or in journalism, for example. We're quite clear that if you're working for longer than 4 weeks, definitely any longer than 4 weeks, you should be considered as an unpaid employee and you should be given a wage to support yourself. Quite frankly, too many people from poor backgrounds won't be able to access these jobs if they have to support themselves for a long period of time.
I should say that in the arts council has been particularly vocal around this and has supported only paid internships for a long time. It hasn't necessarily had an impact yet, so I think we need to be careful about what's happening in different industries. And because I agree, of course, unpaid internships are a problem, but they're not necessarily a problem in the arts, for instance.
Okay, yeah. And I think we're going to come on to the topic of education, but it's definitely an issue that there needs to be funding and there needs to be focused in deprived areas and in areas where potentially there are more people from minorities who are possibly from poor backgrounds. There needs to be a focus on making sure that they've got the same access to things such as music lessons, to drama, to arts courses as well. My stepmother is a teacher in a very deprived school, and she's a home economics teacher, and she said that in recent years this government's narrow focus on the curriculum, the pushing of things like Latin, science, engineering at the expense of trying to help young people get qualifications in things like what she teaches in home economics or in drama and arts, has really made it very difficult for them to engage young people and get them staying in school and interested in things like that. And I think it's very important we recognise that and make sure that those opportunities stay there for people in all the different communities so that they can, from a young age, feel the culture's for them and not just for other groups of people as well.
Okay. And Daniel, do you want to respond to this?
Yeah, very quickly. I think it's symptomatic of wider problems in society, and what depresses me is I think things have actually gone backwards in the last few years. You look at the controversies around some of the Oscars, you look at some of the issues around this sort of new batch of aristocratic white men who seem to be dominating our television screens. I think it's part of, I'm afraid, what happened after 2010 with Osborne, Cameron, the whole lot. It's the tops running the country, and it's almost the same thing through some reasons. And you can ask yourself why that is. Of course, it's partly because you look at the way the private schools work, where people are drawn from. We have a hugely unequal system in this country. And that's why we need a really, really big change, in my view. And that's, I think, why this election could be quite interesting, because it's the first time for a long time, really big change is on offer. And that's fundamental structural change to our society, which could make a big difference. Because otherwise, we're just going to go on having this argument, this debate about how you tinker around the edges. But final, very practical point, the way to tackle this is always to expose it at every level. That's why things like the Equality Act in 2010 was so important, never properly implemented. But if you keep on exposing it, then actually it shows it's unacceptable and you can begin to get change.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Stuart, education. So I'll start with Julian. But this is another of those issues that won't go away. We asked this very, very similar question at the last hustings that we did. I'm going to ask it again. I think at the time of the last hustings, the Warwick report had come out. And the Warwick report 2015 was basically saying that children's opportunity to engage in arts in schools was notably decreasing, and it had notably decreased over the preceding 5 years. So a significant decline in arts in schools. The question is, and it was then 2 years ago, still is the question, what can be done to ensure creativity is part of every child's education?
I think it's a really good question. I'll probably give you the same answer I gave a couple of years ago.
That's fine, maybe a different audience.
Creativity is really essential. I mean, and again, it comes down, I was talking about earlier, what is the purpose of life? What is the point of education? And actually, I think Michael Gove and others were completely wrong to think it was about how you do on tests. Now, that is an incredibly limited view. I'm a scientist. I think it's great that people learn more about science. But actually, it's not how you measure it at the age of 16, which tells you whether people get it. So good education is measured, to me, by how happy is somebody with their life when they're 50. That's what an education about. It's about setting somebody up for that. And that includes things like resilience, dealing with the world as it is, sex relationships education, all these things that help you to live your life so that that you can be what you want to be and you'll be able to do it. And creativity is absolutely a key part of that. I would see a much larger role for creativity in schools, not just well-defined set lessons. These aren't opposed. I mean, science is a fundamentally creative subject. It isn't if it's taught badly, but when taught properly, it's a fundamentally creative, enjoyable thing to do. There's an idea in the manifesto from the Creative Industries Federation, which I really like, for example, which would be to say that schools cannot be rated as outstanding unless they teach a creative subject. Now, actually, I think it's a really nice idea, because schools are given too often the wrong agendas. They're told, this is what you have to do, this is the thing that counts, don't do the things which you know will be better for the pupils. And actually putting some levers in, so there's a real incentive to get on there. I've been involved with campaigning, particularly on music, here in Cambridgeshire for a very, very long time. Some of you may know the Cambridgeshire Instrumental Music Agency. I used to be very involved with that, the Cambridge Youth Orchestra. We campaigned 20 years ago, I guess it was, for more money for music in schools. That was a big focus. We've kept that fight going for a very, very long time. One of the challenges schools in Cambridgeshire have is that we are still very badly funded. And this goes back to the 1980s, where Baroness Blatch, who was Conservative leader of the County Council then, cut spending and cut taxes. And we've been stuck, fairly low spending since then. And that means that schools here in Cambridgeshire that actually do want to be able to do more of this are facing a really, really tight budget crunch, one that's just getting worse in the last couple of years. I fought it on this for age. I got an extra £23.2 million a year to our schools as of a few years ago. That's now at risk. We'll have to see what happens. It's not enough to get us up to a fair funding level, but if you say to the schools that do want to do creativity, we're not going to give you any money to do it, and you have to do these things, you have to do stupid SATs at primary school, all that sort of thing, they're not going to do the things that they know they ought to do.
Cool, thank you. Stuart?
Yeah, so I've been speaking to a number of teachers and people I know working in education about this recently, and they've all discussed what I mentioned in my last answer, which was the government's recent focus on the STEM subjects, on science, technology, engineering and maths, at the expense, not at the expense of focusing on other more creative subjects as well. To be clear, those are obviously very important subjects in their own right as well, and it's important that schools focus on them. But what we're trying to do, and I agree with Julie, is not bring up workarounds to serve the commerce and the business of the future, but bring up healthy, well-balanced individuals who go on to think for themselves and contribute to society in our country. And I think it's very, very important that we take a balanced view towards children's education and ensure they've got access to all the creative and cultural experiences as well. For example, sorry, I've just drawn a blank there for a second, but it's also very, very important that we support our teachers in this, because to be brutally honest, to expect the level of workload that our teachers have at the moment, to expect them after working from 7 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, marking exam papers, preparing lessons, to go in and inspire children the next day is expecting an awful lot of them. And I think the government should stop fighting with teachers and give them the resources that they need to do that job properly and to inspire children. And yet, another local teacher I know who's a member of our local party has been telling me recently about the pressure on her. She's been trying to run courses in sustainability and global awareness where they can bring teachers in, educate them on these issues so they can bring back to the children that they teach as well. And she's been running these courses recently and has been increasingly unable to get teachers to attend because they just simply don't have the time. They're not paid to attend, they're not paid to do these kind of things anymore. So it's about money, it's about supporting teachers and giving them resources they need, but it's also about trying to bring up balanced children, like I say, as well.
Daniel, do you?
Agree with much of that. I think we discussed this 2 years ago. At the time I said STEAM, not STEM. I stand absolutely by that. I go around a lot of schools, obviously, part of the job of being a local MP. I see fantastic stuff being done in a lot of the schools, actually. I was at St Paul's School the other day, and it was quite funny because I was shown around by two charming young people, and everywhere we went, they said, I would ask them things like, do you do music? And they say, yes, we do music, but the school doesn't have enough money. And then we go into the art room and say, how much art do you do? And we say, we do lots of art, but the school doesn't have enough money. These people have been, they're really on message. People are being proud of them, but that is the key point. The thing is, you can go so far. I mean, teachers are having to bring materials in themselves. And actually, I thought it was pretty sad that in a school like that, I'm not singling that school out particularly, as one that I visited last week, but it was quite clear to me that they wanted to do music, and the resources weren't there for them to do it. And in a rich city like this, in a rich country like this, that we can't find the money to do that, that to me is absurd.
And I'm afraid they would all love to work with arts organisations in partnership, and we would love to do that, but also we don't have the money to do
Precisely.
it. We don't have the resources to go and help the schools, so it makes it a challenging environment.
But this is the fundamental, and this is where we're going to have the big argument over the next few weeks in this election campaign, because the funding of our schools, we saw in London, where with London Challenge, that schools were lifted. Now the Conservatives are now trying to say we're going to take that money away to redistribute it. Now, that is not the answer to this, to take money away from successful schools. What we need to do is lift the level of resource in a county like this to the level that's actually required. It is absolutely ridiculous to say we cannot do that. We can do that, but it will mean shifting resources. Just yesterday we saw, didn't we, the Sunday Times Rich List, the 2 richest people in this country having more money than we spend on education and health in a year. That is a staggering statistic. There is money in this country, it should be in our schools.
Well, the final word about education.
I want to pick up on 2 points that have been made, one slightly in the last question, inequality and funding. But first, I'm a Conservative, so I celebrate the fact that people like Adele, the nouveau riche, they're not toffs, they're people who have succeeded in the creative industries. Now, my mother was a teacher, my sister's a teacher, I've taught a lot overseas, I've helped promote education overseas. So I believe in education. What the Conservatives are doing is not taking away, as Daniel said. The MPs across all parties for many years have said funding formula was wrong and we need to come up with something better. The government has put out proposals for discussion, and that discussion is currently going on. Cambridgeshire thankfully benefits from that, and hopefully whenever the final form comes through, Cambridgeshire will continue to benefit.
A lot of losers.
You had your chance, then we pick up. On the inequality issue, yeah, we do need change, but thankfully we've delivered it. Under the Conservatives, the richest are paying more in tax than ever happened under a Labour government. Inequality now is at its lowest since sometime under Thatcher, as measured internationally. Gini coefficient. So we are doing a good job in terms of redistribution. The actual question was... there were so many points raised by
how do we ensure that creativity, every child has access to creativity?
That's right, so it does sort of come back to the underfunding in schools. And yes, while I disagree with the way that Daniel presented the issue of the fair funding formula, Julian was perfectly right. We don't just want to get all the schools even up to average level. We want to see as much investment in our schools as possible. This government has invested in skills training, in apprenticeships that we've already talked about this evening, but that can only happen under a strong economy. And who's going to deliver a strong economy for this country? Is it the floundering, weak Jeremy Corbyn, who will be supported by either of these other candidates here, or is it Theresa May and a strong and stable government? The choice is yours.
Julian wanted just one final.
Yeah, so just very briefly, I mean, just on the Gini coefficient thing, it's not right that we're now lower than we were under Thatcher. It went up under Thatcher, it went up under Blair. It did come down under the coalition. I think it's now ticking back up again, but it is not back to where it was.
We are lower than we've been in many
years. If you point me to ONS figures and say that, we can talk about it next time. I would love that to be true. I fear that's not what it was 2 weeks ago when I looked. The other thing is about schools funding, and there are 2 questions here, and they're both important. One is how much money nationally goes into education. There has to be more of that, and that is not what's coming. We always used to see an increase per pupil per year, and the last couple of years we have not seen that. We need more money into schools nationally. Then there's a question about how much of that comes to Cambridgeshire. And Cambridgeshire was left massively underfunded. The whole time under Labour, prior to that under Thatcher, we were right at the bottom of schools funding. We got up to, I think, the 3rd lowest in the entire country. I don't think a pupil in Cambridgeshire was worth that much less than somebody just across the border in Royston, in Norfolk or Suffolk. That's what I managed to get changed finally. We're not as high as we need to be, but we have to get to our fair level and get the national amount up to a fair level. We need both of those.
Okay, Julian, a final word. Does anybody want a final word before we move on to the last question?
Yes, I'll have one as well, if that's all right. We're going to hear a lot over the coming weeks, the Tory battle line obviously about strong and stable leadership, but also throwing big numbers that you would expect you just to digest that number instantly. The simple fact is, money per pupil per head is not going up.
Correct.
The money that's being invested, going in, is going up, but the growth in the pupil size and the country size means that actual funding per pupil per head is dropping, and that's something that we need to change. And also I'll point to the fact that it's not necessarily just about the money that's invested in schools, but it's about policies like free school meals that we in the Green Party have talked about for a long time as well. If children are turning up at school hungry, unable to study, and they're not able to pay full attention to their classes because they've been going hungry because of the rise of in-work poverty, for example, then that's something that needs to be addressed as well as education funding.
Okay. Thank you. The final question, I'm sure I'm going to start with you again because we're going round in this way. The final question is about manifestos. I said at the beginning nobody's published a manifesto yet. I'm right? Yes. Can you give us 3 practical, solid things around creativity, creative cultural industries, the arts, that you would like to see in your party's manifesto, and possibly something that you would be fighting for as the manifestos are written?
The very first thing, and I think it's fundamental, as Daniel's talked about as well, is funding. All the other things are very nice to talk about, but nothing can happen without adequate funding. And since 2010, there's been a drastic decrease in the amount of money given to local authorities. And of course, local authorities have to concentrate on spending money on things that they have to provide, like social care, like collecting people's bins, which has meant that the money invested in things like arts and creative industries has fallen quite dramatically. I think the Arts Council pointed to something like a £250 million a year decrease since 2010. So funding, restoring adequate funding to local authorities so that they can provide key services, but also services for creative industries as well, is something that I'll be fighting for. I also, as I talked about earlier, understand the difficulties in people in finding secure work in areas like the creative industries. I'd like to see there being stronger action on ending exploitative unpaid internships, though I acknowledge what you said earlier. And that was something that was in our last manifesto. I hope it will be in this next one as well. And I don't know if it will be in a national manifesto, but locally, I just think it will be very, very important that we've got an MP in Cambridge who's willing to stand up for the dynamic kind of innovative projects that we've got here. It's about hard power and soft power, what you can secure in Westminster, but also about what you can encourage in the community by encouraging things and speaking to people and spreading the words and sticking up for those local good things that we're doing in Cambridge. And I'll be very supportive of those if I'm elected.
Brilliant. Daniel, 2 things from you.
I would want to go back to almost where we started with the guarantees on freedom of movement, because I think that's absolutely essential to maintaining our success in the sector. I'd also go back to pay and resources though, because I think there is a fundamental problem in the sector around pay. I applaud you for your attempts to be a living wage employer, but of course it's difficult to do if you haven't got the money coming in.
Indeed.
So I don't think we're going to get the kind of change in the workforce unless we've got those guarantees underpinning it. And thirdly, it would be, I suppose, a long-term commitment to inclusivity. Going back to my point about free access, but also really driving hard to make sure we're reaching out to other communities and other parts of the communities that at the moment aren't having full access.
John, 3 points from the Conservatives.
I want to answer this question slightly carefully, given my recent contacts with various ministers, including the Prime Minister's Policy Board, which has been writing the manifesto. But I would be very surprised if skills and training isn't a big part of that manifesto. And I would like to see a continued and greater investment in the apprenticeships that we've delivered over the last few years. I would like to see continued and perhaps even increased work alongside an investment into the British film industry, which I've already referred to some of the ways we've been able to fund bursaries and the like with that group. And for the third one, yeah, I would just like to see a strong and stable economy, and that's only going to happen
Excellent. Julian.
Creativity. So, John, you remind me of Daniel's pupils, so they were so on message that he said it every time. Isn't there a baldrick line? No, we did not see that. I did not see that speckled pigeon. No, we did not see it. Deny everything, that's it. I agree with, actually I have to say, with almost everything that was said. It would be good to have a strong and stable economy. I just don't like the way it's being misused when actually the Tories are trashing the economy through Brexit. But I agree with everything otherwise that everybody said. So let me try and come up with a few other ones.
The economic indicator is down since our vote.
Well, let's say the pound, for example. We will have this argument over the rest of the month. I think the fact that it costs more to buy food so you get less of it, which hits people with less money more, is a problem. But let's move on, Ross. We'll do this another night. We have an EU Hustings, if you'd like to come tomorrow, where this may come up again. We'll just pick up on a few things. And I have a sort of cheat sheet that I got from HQ this time. I didn't write this year's manifesto, I did the one 2 years ago. But one is about arts and creative subjects in schools. It's something which I really hope that will actually make it in. There's also some really interesting ideas, and actually pretty much all the stuff in the Creative Industries Federation, the creative enterprise zones, to really foster people able to work together. It's a really nice idea that they've come up with and would work. If you want to read more about that, we have a thing called The Power of Creativity. If you want to read the whole lot, search for The Power of Creativity, Lib Dems. Apparently we're not the only people to choose that phrase, and you can read a lot more. The last one, we haven't really talked about it that much, is live music venues. And they have been massively under threat. There was a legal change 2008, was it, that made licensing extremely difficult for live music. Something which some of my colleagues fought very hard to get changed back. And actually keeping live music venues, not just the big things, the tiny little back room of a pub, front room of a pub, you know all the places, the Flying Pig, places like that, able to keep going and just let people perform, making sure that can continue would be something I'd like to see us do. Good. Thank you.
Pubs open.
Sorry?
A lot of live venues are in pubs.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
We've seen pub culture dying for the last 6 years, and it's not really being supported at all by the current
Well, I can talk about pub campaigning that I've done many times before,
But this is the moment we want to move to the floor. This is perfect. Our stewards are going to hand around microphones. Could you please use the microphone just so that we can hear you? Does anybody, are you guys okay for water and everything? Yeah. Would anybody like to ask a question? Yes, the man on the right here. Can we please try and keep the questions focused as much as possible on creative and cultural industries and the arts in the nature of the debate? So give us warning if you're going to go off-piste.
Okay, is that working? I'll still shout. I work in a secondary school, and this week we're announcing redundancies. So for you to say about education policy, I can't believe that. The first thing that's going to be hit is support services for disadvantaged children, arts, drama, and so on. So it's unbelievably sort of depressing. There's no question to you, I'm afraid, as a Conservative. My question is to you three guys there. You're all singing from the same hymn sheet. I really respect all three of you. Why don't you go back to your organisations and your party leaders and say, let's join together and stop these guys from destroying our country.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, I don't need to go to the leader of my party because we've been absolutely clear about this so far. We should be talking about how to work together. Across the country, the Green Party have been taking the lead and stepping down in marginal constituencies to try and make sure that we've got a chance of unseating the really nasty Tories where we possibly can. I've been really heartened by the news that in Jeremy Hunt's constituency, for example, Labour activists have now joined Lib Dems, Greens and Standing Down, so that we've got a National Health Action Party person free to give him a good shot. Unfortunately, I don't think in Cambridge it's necessarily the best idea because, no disrespect to John, but I don't think the Conservatives have much of a chance. And much as we agree on a lot of issues, we also have a number of distinct policy areas where we think very, very differently. And my message will be clear that in this election, if you want parties to work together, unfortunately the hierarchies of both the Lib Dems and the Labour Party have so far been very negative about the idea of working together, and they've not explored it as fully as we would like. You have to vote for the Green Party if you want a different kind of politics and people to start talking properly about working together.
Does anybody else want to respond?
I'd be quite happy to. I think this is really, really difficult because this has been under discussion for most of my political life. I've been a Labour campaigner in the east of England for 30, 40 years, and we've always had this issue about whether there will be ways of working together. The problem is that the voters don't always, you can't use the voters like pieces on a chessboard, in my view. And I think you have to leave the voters to work it out, because they don't always do what you expect them to do. Even if you just look at the mayoral election last week, where the second preferences went, you don't find they go where you necessarily think they're going to go. So, sadly, I would like to think that all the people who vote Labour are progressive voters. Let me just give you one example, which is not a Labour voter. I remember a door in Scotland Road a few years ago was slammed in my face. It doesn't happen very often in Cambridge, because people in Cambridge are nice. But as the door was being slammed, I heard the person saying, "I hate the effing EU," I'm going to vote Liberal Democrat. And I just make the point that is not, you cannot assume that people who vote for a particular party always share all the views and values of that party. So I don't think it's quite as straightforward as it seems. I think in the end, the truth is that it's going to always in British politics, it's a Conservative government or a Labour government. You don't want a Conservative government, you know what to do.
I find this very frustrating, this tribalism that you get. I think, I'm very keen on working with other people. I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm a director of an organisation called the Joseph Rowntree Reform Trust, which has been going for over 100 years. Joseph Rowntree are of fruit pastel fame, so you don't have to buy them now because we don't get any money anymore from them. And we've funded quite a lot of efforts to try to do some of this cross-party working. So we've been backing More United and a whole bunch of other organisations, because actually it would be really good to see that sort of collaboration happening. We've also been up for this. I called publicly for us to stand down in Brighton Pavilion to help Caroline, who's a fantastic MP. I've said that many times. She is marvellous. I really enjoyed working with her. I'd love to continue working with her. She has to get re-elected for that to happen, and so do I, but that's another issue. And there are lots of places now where we've been able to work with the Greens in Richmond Park, where the Greens pulled out so we could beat Zach Goldsmith. I think they've done that again now, to help get them to cable back. There are a number of places where we're able to work together. Labour has absolutely ruled that out, and that is a huge problem. There's been a few occasions on the ground. But if we look at Richmond Park, Labour insisted on fighting, even though they knew that would help Zach Goldsmith to get re-elected. That tribalism, I find, a really, really big problem.
And because all the Labour voters, Julian, made that decision for themselves.
Indeed, Labour did get fewer votes than their members. That is true.
Exactly.
But
leave it to people to decide themselves.
But nonetheless, there was that risk. If you look around Cambridgeshire in these last elections, if you look at seats where it was a Lib Dem Tory marginal, but Labour stood, which wasn't, this doesn't apply to every single seat, outside the city, there were enough seats there that if Labour hadn't stood, almost certainly we would not have a Conservative majority on the county council. We did look at working together on some of those things, and Labour made it clear they weren't interested in it. You can't do deals with people who won't do a deal. I hope we can get there. What would be even better would be to have a fair voting system, so you can actually say, this is my favourite, this is my second favourite, this is my third favourite, this is my least favourite. We did try that.
John, although the question wasn't directed at you, you probably want to talk about coalitions and...
Well, no, I want to pick up on 3 points, but first I'll apologise if anyone thinks it was a planted question, because what we've established is that Lib Dems and the Greens in Cambridge would work with Labour, would prop up a weak Jeremy Corbyn's coalition of chaos, which would be a terrible thing for the economy of this country. Daniel is the one who's right. You've got a choice. It's Labour or it's Conservative. It's Jeremy Corbyn or it's Theresa May. Who do you trust? And Stuart, I'm afraid, unlike Daniel, that's right. Stuart is correct. This seat has been a three-horse race for the last 25 years. Prior to my arriving in Cambridge as a student, 9 out of 10 years for the previous, basically since it went from a two-member seat to a one-member seat, it'd been a Conservative-held seat. For the last 25 years, I accept that's different. The last time it was a Conservative seat was under a female Prime Minister. We've got another one now.
That's good, Roger. We haven't heard from women enough tonight. We'll take a question over here.
Thank you. I'm Pat Marsh, and Daniel mentioned video games as part of the creative industry, and Julian mentioned ARM. In the 1970s, I introduced in a company, joint Japanese company, Space Invaders, and from that company we paid a young graduate, Herman Hauser, £20,000 to develop a printed circuit board, and with that £20,000 he developed Acorn, and from there ARM. And I became chairman of the British Amusement Catering Trades Association, which is the gaming, video and casino industry, and I voted leave, as did almost every company in that industry, because we had such awful conditions from the EU and the regulations that we could not survive I have owned companies employing thousands of people. I'm a fellow of a college here and a school governor, and I would ask John what would his message be to all of us who support the Conservative government and who are subject to such vitriol and such denial from other politicians here. What would your advice be to someone like me? Do I still continue to have support for the Conservatives?
I would say come back home, vote Conservative. As I say, for the last 25 years, I know a lot of Conservatives in Cambridge have felt they have to vote tactically Labour and Lib Dem. I love one particular experience I had of knocking on one door and the person said, oh no, I'm going to vote Lib Dem to keep Labour out. And then I went to the neighbour who said, I'm going to vote Labour to keep Lib Dem out. Even though they both love to vote Conservative, I would say this is the year. Come back to Theresa May and she will have sufficient... Vote with us, get your friends to vote with us, get your businesses to vote with us, because then she can have sufficiently strong a mandate. We saw yesterday the strong mandate that the new French president has. We need to send our Prime Minister back into those negotiations with strong mandate, and then we'll get the flexible immigration that we want, as well as the controlled immigration that the Leave.
Okay, I want to keep moving, but if you quick, because I just
very briefly, you're of course welcome to your view. According to the Creative Industries Federation, 96% of their members support remaining in the EU. 84% said the result will have a huge effect on the future generation success of their organisations. So I think most don't get that way, and certainly Herman Hauser, who's done so many great things, is an ardent Remainer and be horrified at the thoughts of that it was a good thing for business to leave.
represents the video gaming industry very strongly in favour of where we're coming from.
If we can get to the question of my planted question in a minute.
Can we plant a question, please, for the Green? Does anybody have a question that's going to help the Green?
It's interesting to hear what you say, and obviously you're entitled to view, as we say. You said about companies that voted to leave, and I'm not sure if that was a slip of the tongue, but obviously it's people that are making the vote and making the decisions. And I'm sure many of the people that work for the big corporations and that you mentioned are people that have benefited from the workplace regulations put in place by the European Union. A report by the Trade Union Congress before the referendum pointed to the many different ways that people on low wages and people in different sectors of the economy have benefited from regulations put in place by the European Union. And what I'm really scared about is, as Brexit takes place, this talk of a bonfire of regulations is horrifying. These regulations are regulations that mean that women on low wages have managed to get access to decent pensions, that people aren't discriminated against in their workplaces. They're regulations that protect our water and our air. So that's my big concern as Brexit occurs, and as I say, you're welcome to your view, but when we talk about these regulations, let's be clear that they're not necessarily a negative thing, they're things that protect people.
Thank you. Question here.
You all talked about the arts being important economically and in terms of people's quality of life. Do you agree that they also have something to contribute to our public life and people's engagement in politics and people thinking more independently and communities being empowered in that broader sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And what I think has been slightly pressing about the last year or so is I feel that the reason we've had Brexit and the rest is a lack of confidence and a lack of education. You look at the linkage, you can almost map the areas which voted strongly to leave, where there was a kind of general depression, and that was partly an economic depression, but I think it's also an impoverishment of opportunity and of engagement and of culture. And I think that is really the big story of what's happened in the last few years. It's actually an economic problem underneath it all. But then that leads to this lack of opportunity, lack of engagement, lack of community, lack of creativity and spirit. And it's a general depression. I think people who are confident and optimistic didn't feel the need to turn away from the rest of the world. And actually, a few more years down the line, when perhaps we can lift more people, then we can change it.
The short answer is yes. I think there are huge links. And actually, I think artistic endeavours in all sorts are individual, creative, wonderful things. I think they are very much linked with a philosophy, with a political engagement and connection. There's a quote at the beginning of this power of creativity thing that I mentioned earlier. A liberal believes in the raucous, unpredictable capacity of people. And actually, I think that's quite a powerful thing, because that's what good art is. It should be somewhat, not too raucous, but raucous, unpredictable, and it is about what people can do.
I think it's also very important that people are engaging in politics in different ways and feel interested and engaged in taking part in these debates. Just before the mayoral election recently, there was a really interesting hustings held by the Cambridge Commons campaign, which is a campaign around how do we reduce inequality in the city around here. And rather than having all of us candidates sitting on a stage talking at you for hours, we sat around different tables, and it was kind of like speed dating. Everyone got cards and they came round the table speaking to us all. And I found that a much more illuminating experience than ever sitting on top of the stage talking to everyone here. Because none of us have a monopoly on wisdom on how to improve things. We need to hear ideas from people as well. And I hope there's going to be more opportunities like that during this campaign as well.
The 2010 hustings here was like that.
Yes, it was. And we did a little bit of that last time where we broke you up in the foyer and gave you drinks. But we've decided not to do it this year, which is obviously not the right... Your turn, indeed.
Yes. I taught in the former Soviet Union for the best part of a decade. I kind of got a bit of reputation. I don't know how many of you remember Dead Poets Society, but because I always tried to instill creative and critical thinking in my students, I did become known as the kind of Robin Williams figure, which was a reputation I wasn't ashamed to carry, but therefore, yes, most definitely.
Question here.
This is, I'm not going to get up and say, oh, captain, like captain, standing on a chair or anything. I want to go back to something that Daniel Zeichner said at the beginning about access to information goods, cultural goods. You mentioned being able to get into museums through state subsidy. In the case of information goods, that is copyrighted works and copyrighted information, the copyright laws that we've been required to have in the UK as a result of our participation in the EU allow the rights holders, the holders of those copyrights, to extract all the possible surplus value of consumers. That is to say, everyone gets it, and everyone gets it at a different price, and all of the money that anyone is willing to pay on cultural goods can be captured by the rights holders through price discrimination, the way that they do with airline tickets and so on. This is because of the Copyright Directive 2001, which prevents people from circumventing copyright protection mechanisms, even if they're doing it to help the police tackle child pornography. What I'd like to know is, do you envision that there will be an opportunity and would you support reducing the levels of copyright and intellectual property protection now that we are likely to leave the EU, either in terms of the length of these rights or the types of cultural or intellectual activities that they currently restrict?
Does anybody have a knowledge of copyright enough to answer that?
Or of patents?
Well, look, it is an extremely detailed, complicated question, but I think there's a broader principle behind it, which I think is actually really important, that artists have got to make a living, in my view, and you have to have a system which allows that to work reasonably. And I quite understand, I mean, it's been quite a lengthy debate now about who extracts the value and the intellectual property rights. Getting that balance right is important, and I'm not entirely sure it has always been got entirely right in the past. But it sounds great, things can be free, that's wonderful, but people have got to be able to make a living too. And that's where I stand, both as a Labour politician and as a trade unionist, because people who are working in the industry can't be doing it for nothing.
I mean, this is an issue we've talked about before, and I was quite involved in my time in Parliament. I'll try to do the sort of summary version, which is, yes, obviously people have to be able to make money from things that they create if that's what they're trying to do. If that doesn't happen at all, then there are things which cannot happen. But we can push for much more about open access. There are lots of cases now of bands, for example, who produce their music free of copyright and say, but come and hear our gig. And they've chosen a different way to make money, and they do much better in terms of getting their music out there because it is free. There's some really interesting models like that. There is definitely a problem that copyright law does protect things often for far too long. It works very much in the interests of the very, very large companies, not in the interests of the artists who are actually producing at the time. You know, it's very much about protecting Mickey Mouse, so that Mickey Mouse is always protected. You know, Disney does not need more ways of making money, and they're not the most generous people at giving the money to people who do the actual work to start with. So we could make huge changes. We've fought, as you know, to allow things like satire to be protected and a whole lot of other things. I'm sure there are tweaks, but actually, I know you and I disagree completely about Brexit and much else, I think we are the worry that I would have is we'll go more like the American model, which in many ways is worse for both the people who actually produce creative things and worse for consumers. The US model is not what I want to see us go down.
Copyright legislation much more liberal than Britain.
John, Stuart,
I don't have a huge knowledge of copyright patent law. I'd be happy to hear your opinions on it after. But I more or less agree with the idea of necessarily balancing the interests of producers.
No, you'd like to respond?
Yeah, I think there's another bigger issue, which is there isn't going to be a bonfire of regulations. Theresa May and the Conservatives have said we'll transfer all the EU regulations into British law, and then the British government and the British MPs, the people that we will all be sending to the Houses of Commons in about 31 days' time, they will be able to look through all those regulations and decide which ones, yes, we want to get rid of or we want to amend. And that would be one that I suspect they would amend.
There's all the heavy gate.
Is that a question?
I'm just about to graduate from Cambridge School of Art, and a lot of my friends would love to stay in Cambridge because it's great for creativity, but it's so expensive, and a lot of them are going back to where they used to live. What can you offer for people in the creative industry who want to live here but find it far too expensive? Because it's not a very stable job to go into in creative industries. It can be quite up and down. So what can you offer people who want to live here? But
I think everybody wants to say something to this. Daniel, do you want to start?
I think, are you talking about housing or employment here?
Housing mostly. What can you
housing. First of all, I'm delighted that the City Council here managed to extract money from the government for 500 new council homes. I think that's really, really important. So I think that's a big plus. But I think what an incoming Labour government would do would really crack down on the private rented sector, because there are so many scams going on, there's so many extra fees and charges, and also this endless round of rents being put up every 6 months on renewal is what's been driving it up and up and up. So much tougher regulation on the private rented sector, more affordable new homes, more council homes. I think it's time to actually reinvent council housing and make it a tenure of choice for people, which it hasn't been for a long time. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity.
Stuart?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Hayden.
Sorry. I have very much the same problem. I work for the NHS, I work at Addenbrooke's, and I find it a struggle to afford to live in the city as well, and I know it's a problem for many people on lower incomes. Housing is the big issue, and it's going to be a huge issue for Cambridge and how our local politicians want to deal with it after this election. It's about much more than just building houses. Building houses is very, very important, but it's also about protecting the supply of houses and making sure they don't just disappear off. A lot of the new houses that are being built in and around Cambridge are sold to foreign investors almost immediately, and a huge proportion of those houses in London, properties there are being sold off as well. As long as property remains a very lucrative way of speculating and gaining money, it's going to be difficult to keep housing for local people who want to afford a decent place to live. But of course, I'm in favour of building more houses as well, and the Green Party would end the right to buy, whereby people are buying council houses, and then in the long term a lot of them are being turned over to private landlords and costing a lot more in private rents as well. But I would also like to see a lot more security and protection for people in the creative industries. We've already talked about internships and things, but it's about funding and making sure that there is secure projects for people to work on that give you a decent security over a number of years rather than going from one gig to another, from one contract to another as well.
I agree with a lot of that. The right to buy and the right to acquire now for housing association properties is hugely damaging. It was a Thatcherite thing which has just been continued, time after time, where it should have been ended. Our manifesto at the last election said that areas should be allowed to just completely end it and say, look, it might be appropriate in some parts of the country, fine, that's up to them, but here in Cambridge, no. We have too much of a problem. It should just be ended. It should have been ended, as I say. It could have been done as soon as John Major was lost. But it was kept going. We have to keep that supply. On council houses, I agree we desperately need more. 500 isn't enough. When we ran the council, and I was the MP and we were in government, we changed the rules so that it's a complicated system. It used to be that about 1,300 quid for every council tenant was confiscated from Cambridge, taken elsewhere. And so between 1997 and 2010, about £240 million paid by council tenants was taken away from Cambridge and South Cambs. That would have paid for an awful lot of council houses. That would have been fantastic. We ended that system and started to build small council houses. We were talking about building 1,800. Labour City Council, it's not actually their fault that couldn't be continued. It's because the government changed the rules. But 1,800 is the smallest end of what we need. On the private rented sector, absolutely, the rules need to change. I had a bill in Parliament to make huge differences, both in security of tenure for housing, but also to tackle some of the rogue landlords, to get rid of the letting agent fees, which are absolutely exorbitant. So we have to change the rules, but we also have to get more houses and more houses out there for people. It's not going to be easy. You know, any of us who sit here and say, tell you what, give us a couple of years, it'll all be fine. I guess one good thing about Brexit, if it causes the harm to the economy we're thinking, that may cool house prices down somewhat. Not quite in a good way. Maybe that's one of the benefits we'll get.
John, I'm sure you'll want to tell us, what advice do you have for Hayden? Really direct advice for him, I think that would be fair.
All right, well, I'll answer Hayden's advice question, and then maybe I'll give the advice. But I think we are all agreed. It's been a long problem, many, many years, not enough houses have been built, and that is fundamentally the issue. I don't know if you read the government's white paper that was published earlier in the year on housing. I happened to have several meetings with the Secretary of State for Communities Local Government, Minister for Housing, and they recognise that some of the things like new build being bought up by foreigners, like developers being able to sit on land banks, are issues that need to be addressed. And to look back to your earlier question, maybe that's something I would like to hope to see in the manifesto, measures to address these kind of things. One thing I'm proud of as a Conservative is that under Conservative government, we've seen about 2.5 times as many social housing built since 2010 than happened under the 13 years of Labour. Last year saw the biggest increase in the rate of new build of affordable housing, and that's something that's being maintained. Of course, we need to go further, but this is progress, and we're only going to be able to continue that progress if we vote Conservative. So that's my advice, vote Conservative. Let's continue with the strong and stable government that we've seen, and be able to continue reducing that deficit. We've reduced Labour's deficit by 2/3. I want to continue that.
We're coming very near to the end, and I think it'd be nice to have time for a drink and a chat to the candidates at the end. Can I take one last question? I'm sorry, I'm going to take it from the lady at the back. I'm sorry.
My name is Fiona, and I wanted to ask a question about one aspect of culture that I don't think has come up at all this evening, that's journalism. In an era of fake news, and where, in particular, local newspapers have had really tough times over the last decade, and we are training an awful lot of journalists in our colleges who will struggle ever to get jobs, paid jobs in journalism. What, if anything, can you do as politicians to keep journalism proud and free and fair in this country and not fake?
Great. Should we just go down the line? John, do you want to go first?
So I'm a Conservative, so I believe in free press, but I also recognise a lot of particularly young people get their news from social media, and social media is the kind of place where fake news is able to be propagated. So I am proud that the government's not just our one, not just Theresa May and the Conservatives, but across the world are beginning to work more closely with some of the big companies like Facebook and Google to try and help users as well as the companies, because ultimately we're a community. Politics is about community. So it's not just all for the government, it's not just all for the companies, it's not all just for us as individuals, as parents, whatever. It's for all of us to play our part, and there is a role for all of us. We have now identified the issue. Fake news is a problem, and therefore I think all those parties I've mentioned, state, businesses, and us as individuals, are beginning to and will increasingly have a greater role in trying to. We're not going to get rid of it. You know, it's one of those things. It exists. People lie, but if we can find ways that we can flag it so that other people don't think it's real, that'd be great.
Julian, do you want a word on this? Or?
I like this idea that newspapers don't do fake news. Has anybody read the Daily Mail? Sorry, in unconnected sentences, of course, just in case anybody's listening. And there is a big challenge. I think one of the problems is that a lot of power in the newspaper industry is getting over-concentrated into a handful of owners, almost all of whom are billionaires. The Guardian is one of the few exceptions. The Cambridge News is now Trinity Mirror, and talking to people there, I won't ask Josh to comment. There are definitely some frictions around the change there and what they are expected to do as news. Part of that is a technology change, and some publications have been much better at adjusting to it than others, working out how you make money. And there is a real challenge. How do you collect money in an era of free? When I can get stuff for free in all sorts of ways, may or may not be reliable, why would I pay money for something? I don't really want to see massively intrusive ads, so I block them. Well, where does the money come from? There are some technological answers there, which might help, micropayments, various things like that. There's a bunch of ideas. But I think we are going to have to think about how we pay for good independent journalism. I mentioned the Joseph Rowntree Reform Trust, which I'm the director of. One of our briefs, when we were set up by Joseph Rowntree, said one of the biggest threats to the country is an over-powerful press that operates the interests of the wealthy. Now, it was 1904 he wrote that, so he was quite insightful. And one of our jobs was to try to find a way to push back on that. So we used to own some newspapers. We used to own the New Statesman, I think it was. We owned the Oxford Mail, various others. I'd be really interested in your ideas perhaps afterwards. If you had some millions to spend on fixing journalism, on solving this problem, what would you do? Because we've been trying to find the answer.
That's a good drinking discussion.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's a very interesting topic, and it's one that I think it would be foolish of any one of us to promise anything too drastic, because these are long-term trends that you've talked about in terms of the funding of print media in the era of social media. How are we going to fund long-term serious journalism? And I think you're right to flag it up because it's a very serious issue. We need to be able to scrutinise government properly to make sure that decisions are made in the public interest, and that's scrutiny at all levels, national government and also local government. And I think the role of local newspapers is increasingly under threat because of their problems with funding. And I think it's very important that we've got people who are able to scrutinise decisions that are made. I'd like to see more media plurality. I'd like to see newspapers and different forms of media owned by different groups and different bodies as well. I think, as Julian's talked about, it's a very, very big problem that so much of the news agenda is driven basically by 3 or 4 individuals. People like Lord Rothermere and Rupert Murdoch drive the news agenda. They've been harping on about Brexit for years, and they've convinced the entire country to vote against what I consider to be their own best interest. And in the longer term, as I've talked about already, I think journalism is one area in particular where it's very, very difficult for young people to make their way in life, because you're expected to gain experience, work unpaid for long periods of time. That's very off-putting to people from poorer backgrounds, and I'd like to see there be more security for people who want to get a future in journalism as well. But again, happy to talk about it after if you've got the solutions.
I think in legislative terms, I think media plurality needs to be addressed. I think Leveson needs to be properly implemented to restore trust, because I think there's a difference between newspapers like the Daily Mail have been peddling fake news since 1924 with the Zinoviet letter, so nothing new there, absolutely. But I think local newspapers are more trusted, and I applaud the Cambridge News for the campaign it's been running on fake news recently. And of course, we also have another Cambridge newspaper at the moment, the Cambridge Independent, so we are to some extent seeing a flourishing, but I appreciate it's quite a complicated local situation. I think the key to this is going to be, if you look back at the impact of the print revolution, when the printing press was invented, it took a long, long time for the social implications to be worked through. I think the technological revolution we've had with social media, we're at a very early stage still in understanding how to see the advantages and the disadvantages from it. And I think we will come to a point where people will begin to understand the value of proper mediation and of journalism. And I understand that journalists are probably not held in much higher repute than politicians or estate agents. But hopefully, even if politicians can't improve their status, at some point in the future we'll be able to point out that actually you do need journalists to mediate between the noise that's out there and the truth. And if we can get to there, we'll be getting to a better society.
Thank you. It's time for a drink. Thank you all so much for this evening. John, Julian, Stuart and Daniel, thank you. And I would like to go back to your very first answers, which were to the first question, which is what is important about creativity in society. Your answers were around quality of life, were around access and equality, and were around economics. And I hope these are good points for us as people who are going to vote, to be thinking about our business in the arts and the creative industries as we make a decision on the 8th of June. Thank you and good luck to you all.